lot. But please join me in welcoming today's panel to the stage. Everybody have a mic?
Yes, I guess I'm on this.
Should we sit? If we don't know what order
If I'm on the end, okay.
It's we can.
Left or right?
There we go. I like it. We democratized it. So in the past, we've kind of just done the panel like town hall style, where we've allowed everybody just to kind of fire away questions. One of the things that tends to happen when that sort of thing happens is we kind of go down one particular path. And so before we started off with just grabbing questions from everyone, there's a couple topics that I just kind of want to touch on briefly. And if you have an opinion about it, we can kind of flesh it out. But if you just want to stay out of one because maybe it's outside of your area of expertise, that's fine too. So basically just agree or disagree. Is this something that the group should pay attention to or ignore? And the first topic that we have up is video production. So Digiday research, 62% of publishers plan to spend more on video production this year. Anita, you're a publisher. Do you plan to spend more on video this year?
So I would disagree with this unless you're a YouTube publisher or a really big publisher.
I would agree, thinking that my son doesn't even search in Google, he searches in YouTube. So he's 12, almost 13, and his entire search is always just on movies, on film. So I think you need to do some video, but not for every niche or every. We are doing more video at Yoast now to address that younger age group, I guess. Yeah.
John, Ben, any thoughts on more video for publishers?
I'm not a publisher.
Nor am I. No, I think it's generally a good thing. If you can get it out, get it in there.
It's a lot of work. We have a studio with a green screen and stuff. So if you do it, well, you need to put an effort in it. Just as written content needs an effort, video is like a lot of work. Yeah.
Speaking of, and so Ben, I have a feeling you'll have something to contribute here. Native apps, PWAs, are we watching the transition before our eyes of kind of the death of native apps and the birth of PWAs?
People say this sometimes. We're seeing some movement in terms of PWA becoming more popular or becoming this hot topic, and I've seen various articles saying, will it replace native apps? The answer is, I don't know what's going to happen. I think you should try it, though, because if you can pull it off, instead of having an app that has to be installed for iOS, app that requires installation for Android, and of course discovery, and then your mobile site, have one site for everything. So it could save you a lot of time if you do this right. So it's worth trying it. But will it happen? Who knows what's going to happen?
That's the story of publishing, right?
That's right. I'll chip in on that. I think content discovery for native apps is really tough. If you're a content producer trying to get people to then download an app and then use that to access your content, it's great if you've got a brand, I think. But if you're providing content in the search results, I think PWA's got to be the way to go. I'm not just saying that because we're at Google. But I do think it's going to be better for the user.
So we're seeing a shift in the social networks that users are kind of flocking to. We're seeing a lot of, Facebook has seen a decline in user base. Instagram has grown, but now we're seeing, more and more users start to use things like stories on Snapchat to consume news. When you start to see kind of the way that that things have shifted from the social perspective, do you think we'll continue to see kind of a musical chairs among the platforms, or do you think that there is a particular format or particular platform that could win out for publishers?
This is US data, right?
I believe it is.
Yeah, because Facebook
Insider.
isn't diminishing everywhere. They're actually growing in lots of places, but not in the US. Not in the Netherlands either. So I think Instagram is getting more important, but that's really hard. At least for us, it's really hard to get traffic from Instagram. I don't know how this is for you.
Yeah, no traffic, yeah.
No. We don't have many followers either. So it's just, we had Facebook and I don't know. We got most traffic from our plugin and our newsletter and organic search, and none from. You just need to be on social, I guess, because everybody expects you to be on social.
Anita, any thoughts on different
Yeah.
platforms?
So I do have some thoughts. I think it's very niche specific, and it depends what your goals are. I mean, everybody's hot about Instagram, but like you say, Marieke, we can't get any traffic from it. So interestingly, we still do well on Facebook, we do well on Twitter, we do well on LinkedIn, and we do well, of all things, on Pinterest, even though we're a business site, because when you think of it, Pinterest is essentially a bookmarking site. They just bookmark by an image. And so for us, that works really well. So it kind of goes against the grain a little bit, but thought.
As you were saying a minute ago, Facebook is pretty dominant in various parts of the world. Like I think in Africa, Indonesia, someplace it's the standard thing you do on your phone is go to Facebook. It's probably why these things exist for Chrome and for the web, because the web isn't as usable in these places. One goal is to make these places be able to use the web more readily, so you can also have the web be a better experience in those countries.
Yeah, no, I think also because those emerging markets that you do have, the infrastructure isn't as good. So if you've got a big platform and they're really good at caching locally, then you're going to get a better response. I have seen publishers get traffic from Instagram. It's quite hard. You have a big arrow going down to the bottom of your mobile saying click here, and then it takes you to the site. But it is tough. And to be honest, I think you just got to be there and see which way it's going to go. I think
It's
going all
important
in
for
on Facebook.
branding, though. So we are on Instagram mainly for branding and keeping up a brand, and so you have to be there. But we don't necessarily. No, you can't link, but we don't. We show people about our company and about what we're doing and give them like short tips. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard.
I mean,
It's been hard since Facebook just went away.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is that about 3 years ago, Facebook, everyone was piling in, and instant articles, and I've seen many publishers lose most of their traffic, or they have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Well, in kind of a follow-up to this one of the things I think is interesting, it's actually something I was discussing with Matt, who spoke earlier today, a little bit about this, but this idea of stories. So I think, we've watched the idea of what a story is become popular initially on Snapchat. We watched Instagram sort of borrow the idea. It's on Facebook as well. And, the announcement last year that AMP was going to allow publishers and all sites to start doing stories of a kind. This seems to be an emerging way that younger generation wants to consume their news. Do you think that this is something here to stay? What do you think the impact of stories might be in publishing in the coming years?
I don't understand stories. I'm too old, I guess. I should ask my son, but he's not on social. You also have people. He's only on YouTube. He doesn't do all the other things. He isn't allowed to because you have to be 13, I guess. Yeah.
He's
So
not
I
on
don't
Snapchat?
know.
He's not on Snapchat?
Yeah, he has an account, but he doesn't do anything with it. He's on WhatsApp, but that's really big in the Netherlands.
I have a 14-year-old. He laughs at stories. He thinks stories are stupid, but he's always on Instagram and WhatsApp.
So I don't understand stories, so maybe someone else.
They're being tried in various places. You're right, AMP has stories now, and they're being monetized now in new ways. Also, Google Search will make stories automatically for certain topics. So it's a thing that's being tried out in various places on the web.
So I should look into that.
Check it out, see what you think about it. Yeah, but who knows what's going to happen.
Oh, I've
for
used
dinner
it
tonight? I
before,
have no
but
idea.
it's not appealing to me as a person, I guess.
So GDPR, it's one of the sexiest topics in digital publishing, regulation. And so there's more than 1,000 news sites still unavailable in Europe that are American news sites, places like the Los Angeles Times. We have things like ads.txt trying to combat ad fraud. California's announced kind of their own version of GDPR. We've now heard the U.S. federal government step in and say it's probably better that we have something federally regulated rather than each state having their own individual ones. We could imagine how convoluted that would get. Where do we see this regulation ending, and where do we see it kind of trending into the near future? John, I'll start with you since you live across the pond.
I do. And it's not quite the apocalypse that everyone thought it was going to be for ad rates or actually for publishers. I think it was good in the fact that if you've got a data handling element and a data owning element. Getting this opt-in isn't that hard. It's just something that pops up, and you have to, pass the result back and keep a record of the result. So it's not that hard. I just see it's better to have some sort of regulation, because it seems like when the platforms are allowed to do things on their own, for example, Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, total unregulation or having no regulation at all. I think that the federal government will deal with it in the United States, and then everyone else will get involved. But either that or it's going to be more fines in Europe. So I just see it as being, this is going to be another cost of doing business around the world, and just making sure that the users have a say, accept or not accept.
It confuses people, I guess. So GDPR has a lot of consequences in our daily life, not only on the internet, but everywhere. And nobody knows exactly what you're allowed to do. So in my school, in the school of my children, we're not allowed to exchange addresses anymore. Because the school is afraid of GDPR fines, which I think is hilarious, because they're not going to be fined. But so it has a lot of consequences. And even online, people don't understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a problem with these things. You often see a box saying, I got the terms and conditions to use this site, and you're like, I don't know what these things mean. Or you go to the doctor and you have 6 pages of things, and you just kind of sign it at the end. I think this is similar. Unfortunately, you go to a site and you see this thing saying, I'll use cookies, and you're like, what are cookies? Those sound tasty. I don't know what those things are. It's just unfortunate, because data privacy is pretty important.
Yeah.
That's hard to actually make it make sense to people. And it may become even more important as people realize their data is being collected out there and sold in various ways. You may see like apps in the web change in fundamental ways, and even monetization change, because it may be impossible to exchange people's information without their consent. Maybe cookies will be harder to use, as Safari also has blocked cookies in various cases from third parties. Things might change a lot, or not at all. I can't predict anything, really. But they could change quite a bit.
I'd like to add one thing about that. I think as far as the website and advertising, it's been kind of a non-issue if you've got some sort of a consent module. Where I think it has impacted perhaps websites is those who do lead gen. So when you go to download like an ebook, for example, and typically people offer an ebook like that because they want to collect the email addresses. And so we, for example, we might get a sponsor and do an ebook and want to be able to pass along the information to a sponsor. You can't do the little auto check boxes like you used to do, where it was auto checked or you just didn't have any box, and you just had a little statement that said this, information, you may get promotions and so on. So that's become, I think, more problematic actually than the ads. That's our experience.
I can say that in general, as Apple does ITP 2.0, for example, and as people are more concerned about these things in the US and especially in Europe, that Google cares about these things a lot. I hear a lot of discussions at Google about what's going to happen. Google wants to keep publishers publishing and making money. It's really important to Google that this happen. So I think however things will change, Google will try its best to make sure that money still flows to publishers. We're not sure what's going to happen, what's going to change, but it matters to Google quite a bit.
I've got one thing to say, which is what we've heard from Google is if you're showing Google ads to users in the European Union and you don't have a consent module, then you do risk being just basically turned off ad exchange. So that's a direct consequence of, and I think you've had a whole year to get your act together to put something up, so that's fair enough.
I'll tell the elementary school of my children that.
Now that's just nuts, though.
Ben brought up a good point, John, that I was interested in your thoughts on. This is the world that you've lived in, but Apple's getting ready to make a second update on basically blocking first-party cookies as well as third-party cookies. If this trend continues and browsers decide that they're going to block first and third-party cookies, and let's pretend there's a cookieless internet, how will online advertising and personalized ads take place? How will this impact display advertising?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, retargeting is where a lot of budget goes in. That's where advertisers get the best bang for their buck. If you can't cookie or retarget people and you've only got context to be able to do any ad targeting, it's going to get pretty difficult. And actually, it's going to be a real pain for the users, because when you go to a site, you don't want to have to keep answering these questions. Is it okay for us to drop a cookie on you to come back to, this site that I've used 10 times before this month? It's a total waste of everyone's time. I don't know why Apple are going down that route. If they are, I hope they don't. But I think that there'll be a backlash from the users more than the industry.
Yeah, and I would imagine that advertisers would have more difficult time than publishers. So I don't imagine that display or digital advertising is going to decline. And so then you have to wonder about different types of targeting. Do you think if all of a sudden we had to go back to contextual targeting, that maybe the value shifts to publishers even more because context is going to matter?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it certainly would give you that's the only lever that a publisher can offer an advertiser in that case. And can publishers offer that better than AdSense? Probably not. So then it'll go back to, I just think it'll be 2 steps back in terms of the evolution of having a good user experience and being able to make money online. Hopefully we can get the regulators to calm everyone down so that it becomes usable and it doesn't make things impossible to use online.
I think they'll find a way too. I mean, so much now works on these 1-by-1 invisible pixels being sent that then send people's information via headers to, this tiny little weird little corner of the internet and the web, and third-party cookies, they just kind of work because they just kind of work and they could have never worked. These weird little corners fund this giant industry. I think they're going to find more weird little corners personally.
So one of the things that I think is interesting is we're seeing more and more publishers find audio to be a growing market for them. So whether it's podcasts or audio roundups like the Financial Times has been doing, but we're also seeing the growth of things like voice search queries. So for publishers, is audio something that they should be paying a close attention to? Is this a new avenue for digital publishing?
I think so, but it's not necessarily related to Google, to voice search, I guess. So I see a lot of people podcasting. I think they'll get like great traction out of that. So I see that that's a trend. Yeah, and voice search are rising, but I don't believe in voice search. Well, I do believe in voice search, but only for certain search queries, for practical search queries. But if you want to read like a very lengthy article, then you want to choose between stuff. And voice search, voice search in relation with a screen maybe will work that way. But with a singular result, so with my Google Home at home, that only gives answers to practical questions. And with my accent, usually does not. So maybe I don't believe in voice search because Google doesn't understand me.
I'm from rural Missouri, and it never seems to understand me either. So we have a unique problem.
I think the screen certainly helps. If you say, Google, how do I make chicken cacciatore?
Yeah.
It can read the whole thing off to you and you'll forget it,
Yeah.
or you can see it on a screen. But my kids, though, do a lot of voice search. If they're doing their homework, they'll say, okay, Google, what's 14 times 27?
That's practical.
And they'll look at it, it'll tell
Yeah,
them.
my children do the same.
I thought you were going to say Alexa.
We have one of those in the house, too, actually. We have both.
So one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier is kind of the shift in ad spend. So we're seeing digital continue to overtake traditional ad spending, and we're seeing specifically programmatic revenue grow. John, is there an end to this? Is there going to be a shift? I mean, right now Google eats up such a huge piece of this pie. Facebook actually isn't growing all that much. Amazon is growing, and they get touted for growing a lot, but it's still a really small percentage of the overall pie. Where is this thing going?
Am I going to get in trouble to talk about monopolies?
It's okay.
Probably. Yeah.
And we're done.
The lights are off. Whoa.
Yeah, the lights went down. Yeah, I mean, when you have a search monopoly, when you have the biggest ad serving and the biggest ad exchange, these things actually give you the opportunity to potentially create other monopolies, which is the definition of a monopoly, I would guess. It's been talked about, and I think there's a candidate for the Democratic ticket who's said that
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren, who said that she would like to see a breakup of these monopolies. I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be happening in America. I can't see it happening. But will it continue? Yeah, sure. I don't see it changing, to be honest.
Monopolies are a problem, I think, in general. It's unfair to have monopolies. My concern is if you break up Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on, you still have Baidu and Tencent and all those other companies lying around who will just eat everyone else's lunch.
And they'll eat them up
So,
too.
Yeah,
So
I'm not sure, honestly.
it's not an easy answer. I think also with the first price auction that's just come out last week, I think that will further strengthen Google's position to be able to provide value for advertisers and publishers, actually. So a lot of the intermediaries who are in that environment are going to be knocked away. I foresee that as being the case. I just think that's evolution, though. I just don't think you should have people involved who are not adding value if, just because you've got one big dominant player.
Do we see advertisers shifting away from digital? I mean, it seems like more and more dollars go into digital every year.
I noticed a trend that's interesting, so Madam, where you're bringing it up is email, like live intent and power inbox. Because the subscriber signs the GDPR thing, and then they just get ads in their email. And that sort of takes care of the GDPR problem.
Email's still really small, though, as a percentage of
But very
total ad
powerful.
spend. It is very powerful.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great traffic source.
Yeah.
Thank you, by the way. No, thank you. I appreciate the context. So one of the things that I think is interesting is the change in SERPs, so the search engine results page. This is something that's always evolving. When people talk about quote-unquote search algorithm updates, one of the things I think is often not accounted for is the changes in SERPs are probably just as taking just the same amount of effect on publishers as a change in rankings are sometimes. So how do we see this continuing to evolve?
Brexit wasn't there yet in 2016. I don't know why. Yes, I don't know why it says that. I don't.
Next question.
No, I just was wondering. I don't know how this is going to evolve. I do think there will be more no-click searches as those answer boxes will change. I talked to you earlier that in the Netherlands we don't have as many answer boxes because Google isn't very good at Dutch. So I think we have a higher organic CTR there because we have fewer answer boxes. But I do like some of Google's answer boxes. Don't like all of them. What do you think?
Well, I think for publishers, it can be very concerning, but I think it's for certain types of publishers. I mean, if you are a publisher who gives short bits of information, factual information, I think having these answer boxes it could be pretty scary if that's all you really offer. But if you have more in-depth analyses and offer much more value than simply answering a factual question, then I don't see those as any kind of problems. And in fact, people, if there's an option to click through, they click through.
Spaces for organic results are getting less, though, so that's not a good thing.
Yeah, that very true.
Moving on. So one of the other kind of trends that we've seen here recently is the pivot to quote unquote subscription. So we're seeing more publishers start to explore the idea of paid subscriptions for their publication. So as a primary form of monetization, we know this has been here in the past for print media. Many of the large news publishers continue to try to make this work. Our friends at the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Is this a trend? Is this something that only works for a very small portion of publishers, or is this something that can work for all publishers?
I think brands have a natural advantage, and I think people are used to subscribing now to content where they weren't in the past, and who'd have thought that subscriptions would come back a few years ago. But if you look at Netflix and the success there, I think there is definitely a market for it. and certainly magazines and newspapers need it. I think for informational publishers that don't have a brand, it's very hard to get anybody to pay for your content. And I think that the vast majority of users will not pay for it unless there is a specific brand bond between you and them. If it's a niche and you can provide a ton of value, people will probably subscribe. But mostly people are used to getting things for free. So it'll work for a percentage, but not for most.
It will make publishing more undemocratic.
There is a possibility you could end up with two-tier internet,
Yeah.
which isn't good.
Anita, what do you think?
Yeah, I think for smaller publishers, definitely it's not, I think, going to be a good option for most, unless you just have such highly specialized information that no one can get anywhere else. Or there are some publishers who really are more like a personal brand, and they have their posse, they have their following, and people pay membership fees for them. But most of those, that's not really publishing so much as that's really much more of, I think just sort of a celebrity, brand following at the micro level.
Web personalization. So this is actually a really interesting one from the standpoint mainly because I have the general question of what it is. I keep seeing it pop up at conferences. I hear some of the largest brands in the world talking about web personalization. But when we start asking questions about, well, what does that look like? Does that mean changing a menu? Does that mean changing the content? Does that mean Ben gets a video and I get an article and Anita gets a podcast? What does web personalization mean?
I'm skeptical.
I'm a little bit scared.
AI is wonderful for various uses. If you want to identify what's in a photo or do all kinds of things that are like that, it's very powerful. But I'm not sure it's going to succeed in this particular area anytime soon. This is just speculation, though.
Are you talking about content or the experience?
I guess personalizing anything based on some sort of knowledge of how they even do it, knowledge of your browsing habits. I guess I could imagine, for example, let's say you were really good at chess, for example, and went to chess.com. We knew you're better at chess. Maybe you'd get more advanced chess content right away. But I think that this is not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, that's for content, isn't it? So I kind of agree on the content, although, I think the idea of showing Marieke's son a video, and just because he's the sort of, the people like him watch videos and people like me don't. But another one might be, I'm on a gigabit connection at home on my phone via Wi-Fi. Maybe I want to get the full experience of whatever I can get. Maybe I shouldn't see an AMP page, for example, because there's no imperative for me to have that. If there's any advantage to showing more features. So
those are good examples, I think.
Yeah.
It wouldn't require AI to do it, but yeah, if you see a better connection, get you a high resolution image, get you a video, get you other stuff.
I guess that comes back to what I see personalization is, which is treating people differently depending on their sort of features. Not necessarily them as a person, but maybe lookalike users, and to try and improve things for them in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that gets really interesting here is when we start talking about what would we change from user to user. I mean, when you think about a brand, is GQ, does GQ want to change their font? It's part of their brand. Do they want to change?
Probably not.
Do they want to change their content? The video, the article, if John gets an article and I get a video, are we really getting the same information?
Notice the article there has 0 comments on it.
Thumbs up or thumbs down. So we, because both the thumbs were green and they're also behind the podium, and it would take a second to hand them out, I'll just let you guys use your
Real thumbs.
Actual thumbs.
regular thumbs. So just a quick number of topics. If there's a dissenting opinion, I'll probe a little bit deeper. But voice search, a major threat to publishers. Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right. Regulations will fundamentally change the publishing market. Anita's the optimist. Digital ad rates will keep going up.
I have no thumb on this one.
No thumb vote. There will be a continuance of conglomeration in media.
Big media.
Big media.
It will get harder for the little guys in publishing.
No.
Like I'm agreeing.
No.
Yeah.
Sort of halfway. Sort of halfway.
I'm afraid it will get harder for the little guys. I don't want it to be, but I'm afraid it will.
What do you see being the paramount challenge?
Well, if the number of organic results gets smaller, then there are fewer websites that can compete, and then only Google with his answer boxes, and some large websites will show up at the first page, and that will make it harder for the little guys in publishing.
That's assuming that Google does become an answer engine from being a search engine.
I'm
Which-
hopeful.
I hope it doesn't.
No, I hope
I mean,
it doesn't either.
answer-
But like if you look at the trends for now, you see more and more of the search result being occupied by either ads or answer boxes. So that will make it harder for.
It's my phone there. Sorry, it's on Don't Disturb, but certain calls can get through that. My wife can get through that. It's probably her.
What an
That's how I
honest
said
man.
Hi.
He could have just been like, somebody shut that phone up. Who left their phone on?
Sorry.
So I think it's a mixture. I just want to add to that. I mean, I think
Wait, go back.
I think it's some good and some bad. I mean, I think some really positive things that have happened. For example, I think the Google Publishing Partner Program has been extremely positive for publishers. I think also the fact that we have more tools available to us, like what the Yoast plugin is doing and so on. I think those are things that are really positive, because I can remember back in the 1.5 version of WordPress and how hard it was to do anything way back then. So some of those things are really good. I think the revenue potential is really good. And then I think some of the things make it harder, like GDPR just adds a layer of complexity. I think with all the technology around ad serving and around websites, it's getting harder to keep up. So you really need the right tools, but it's a mixture.
So this one, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah.
Penn knows something
five-
we don't
That's
know.
5 days probably.
It's time to buy Microsoft stock. So we don't have any premium publisher questions for this one. And so that leads us to all of you. Audience questions, right on schedule. So, right here.
I wanted to ask Ben about AMP. So I tried it 2 years ago. I didn't have a good experience with it, so I dropped it. And it was painful to drop it because Google had changed my URLs, and I had to do these redirects. So I noticed in your presentation, is it true that you're going to use keep our URLs and not change them to something AMP, Google/AMP?
Can you explain the Google changing URLs using redirects part?
So all of my URLs, once I adopted AMP, changed from my desktop URL to Google something AMP.
I guess it depends what you were using to do this with, because it could be,
WordPress plugin.
Yeah.
that's probably what it was then. Yeah, there's various ways to make your URL stay the same or be different in different kinds of ways.
Well, what I'm wondering
And-
is, so if I try it again and I want to get off of it, am I going to have to do all these redirects again, or is the URL going
The
to?
redirects wouldn't work if we were talking about the same thing. You can't redirect from google.com to your own domain, for example. But I think in general, most users don't ever see the google.com. If you're on a phone, you don't see that. You're in an AMP viewer, for example, or you're in the Google search viewer. The google.com isn't usually visible. I think it's more of a problem when you try to do certain things like personalization or load content, because google.com is then your domain instead of your domain, and functionality might get broken that way.
All right, maybe it
But
wasn't.
yeah,
AMP was in the URL. Inserted it.
that's something else. That's optional. That's just what the WordPress plugin did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that needn't be there.
But the plugin is much better now, right?
It's gotten better. But for example, our website, amp.dev, is built in AMP, and there's no AMP in the paths there.
Okay. So it's
And-
the same URL, desktop.
That AMP is just a convention that the people often use, but any URL you can use can be AMP. It's just web pages. That doesn't require the amp. The amp doesn't have to be there at all.
Okay.
That's an important question. People often think that's true, but it isn't.
It was very painful to get off of it, so before
Sorry about that.
I want to make sure I have an escape valve, that's all.
I think the Google people actually worked very closely with the new version of the WordPress plugin, with the WordPress people. And the version before that, they didn't work really closely with the WordPress.
They help make a new plugin, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're friends now.
Here in the first row here. Sure. Yeah. Right here to your. Yeah. There you go. To your left.
So the old WordPress plugin does put /amp at the end. If you update the plugin or get a new plugin and it doesn't have the amp, you would have to redirect, right? Because I have all these URLs now that say blah 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 /amp. If the new plugin no longer uses the amp, and I update the plugin.
The plugin may still use that. Actually, I don't know if it does or not. But what is the redirect for, though? What's the purpose of the redirect?
If you have a URL.com/amp
Yeah.
right now for your amp content, thank you, and you decide you go with a different plugin that does not have amp on the end of it, you're going to have a URL that's no longer valid, right?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, so if I have
Sorry.
my website is 365cincinnati.com/bicycle/amp or whatever it is. If this new website and I update my plugin on WordPress to my AMP plugin, if the AMP plugin is no longer using URLs that have /amp at the end, is that plugin going to
I still don't grasp why the question matters. I'm
okay.
sorry. But I can tell you that the plugin may still use AMP. I don't know if it does or not, honestly. But it's not essential to AMP itself that you use that in your path. It's just a thing the plugin did for convenience. What's that? Oh, your internal links were broken in some way?
Like if you're linking to an AMP page and then you no longer have that AMP page, but you have the desktop version still, you'd probably have to redirect to the desktop version.
I had hundreds of page not found errors in my Google Search Console after I switched over.
This is confusing to me still, but well, I can tell you there's various ways to use the plugin. So one way is that you have a paired approach. You have your AMP, you have each page as an AMP version and non-AMP version. Then you have two different URLs for those different pages because you have two different versions, one served on desktop, one served on mobile. You can also use it to have one version of the page everywhere, which is AMP everywhere, which is kind of recommended and better in most cases because you can have the same content, it's just faster on all devices. But your links are your own though. So if you link to a certain page on your site, there should still be a version of it that didn't have the AMP at the end of it. I haven't seen this before. Ask me afterwards, because this sounds like a weird thing that I've never heard before that probably is very important. So tell me, please.
Here in the first row.
So you guys promote AMP really hard. Sorry. You guys push AMP really hard at this conference, but this is for...
I don't think it's on.
Okay. So what about the ad payouts on AMP? Like, nobody talks about it, but they're very low. And also, like, I don't know about Ezoic, but AdSense, you have to create separate ad units to show on AMP. I think Ezoic doesn't even work with AMP, right?
It does work, yeah.
It does? Okay.
Yeah.
But with AdSense, you have to create manually separate ad units so they show up on AMP. Like,
I don't use AdSense. That would be surprising to me. But I know that I think that there are those who have better experiences with ads on AMP and they make more money, those who make less money. What I have seen often is people who use AMP all of a sudden and have the same ad placements as before may do worse because they spent years optimizing their ad placements, ad types for their non-AMP pages. Suddenly it's AMP and you don't allow certain kinds of ads anymore. And the page may be different in some ways. Ads may perform differently. It's really important to optimize your page for the ads. I know that a company called Marfield does this in Spain with people. They convert various sites to AMP. And at first, the ads might be different, might make less money. They work on optimizing the ads, trying out different kinds of formats. By the end, they're just as good or better. But it depends on your experience. We've seen some companies double their money, some companies half the money, and ads are just hard to predict in some ways. But hopefully the idea is that it's a better user experience. They'll stay on the site for longer, view more ads, do more things. But I can't guarantee better ad money, though. Hopefully you'll get it, though.
I'll chip in on this. I think one of the reasons that you're making less money using AMP is because you're not getting the page views per visit that you would get from a normal web page. Because you're in the carousel, people look at one, and then they can swipe left or right, and they leave your site. So the page views per visit, and it's quite hard to be able to get that same depth of user visit. And I guess the idea is that if you're in the carousel, you get compensated by having more traffic from the carousel. I think that the frustration, certainly for us anyway, is that we can't bust the Google cache. So being able to personalize the ads in any way is really tough. We can do it, but it is hard.
I'll add to
Yeah.
Ben had a good point about the ad placement. So one of the things that we've learned from Ezoic customers that use Ezoic on their AMP pages, we use the same placeholder testing and that sort of thing. The layouts often on the AMP pages, once you actually go in and manually set different ad placeholders, the revenue actually is pretty good. And I think that there is something to be said about the fact that people kind of turn on AMP and just kind of hope that the revenue is going to be the same as it is on the regular mobile site, and it's a little bit more involved than that.
Yeah.
This is what's most commonly done. You see people using the WordPress plugin. It generates these AMP pages that aren't very good, and they're out there somewhere. They never look at them, realize they aren't performing very well. It takes some work to make things as good as they were before or better than they were before sometimes. But also, I mean, if AMP doesn't work for you, then don't use AMP. AMP is not for everybody. It doesn't work for all cases. If you're losing money, if it's painful to use it, then make the site fast on your own.
Just make it fast.
Yeah, make
We
it good
made
for
our
users.
site faster than our end pages, so our normal.
It's very possible. to do that.
Impossible.
No, we did that. We did that.
Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah.
Oops. Question over here.
Hi. What do you suggest to do for ad block? I mean, against ad blockers, and also an AMP question: does Taboola and Outbrain work on AMP or no?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they do work on AMP.
I don't know. I've seen them before on lots of sites, these little recommended articles and things like that. They could. I don't know if they actually
I don't
do
know
or
that I've
not.
ever seen one in an AMP article, but
probably
between
don't.
all five of us not knowing, that's kind of odd.
It's up to them, really, I suppose. What was the ad blocker question?
What do you think? Yeah, how should publishers adapt, or what do you see happening with ad blockers?
Because Chrome also is now blocking certain kinds of ads as well. But how do you deal with that as a publisher? I would just try to serve nicer ads that aren't as intrusive. But what do you think? You have the practical experience here.
So,
sorry.
We haven't actually encountered what we consider like a major revenue drop or anything from people using ad blockers. I think I remember reading a survey somewhere where they found that people who said they use ad blockers were really not talking about ad blockers. They were talking about like pop-up windows and things like that. And ad blockers are a very kind of rare thing. Now, some people, the highly technical, the people who are really savvy, use them, but the vast majority of our users and our audience are not that savvy that they even know what these things are. So I don't know. I mean, I think it probably varies, and but we haven't experienced it. Let me say that.
Very, very slow growth into ad blocking, and maybe also because you're a small business and your demographic is not as young, but I think millennials are, and Apple users in general.
So we've seen. I know there's been some research that shows that ad blocking seems to kind of be tailing off. That doesn't seem to be growing linearly. But in countries like the EU and then also specific niches, it's much higher. John, I know this is a conversation that we've had recently about kind of serving ads to the dangers of actually serving ads to people using ad blockers.
Yeah, some people don't know the Google policy on this, so I'll just kind of reiterate it. You are not allowed to use Google ads if you are trying to put ads in to ad block users. That will get you kicked out of Google. So number one, I wouldn't do that. And number two, I wouldn't engage with those companies that are offering a service to do that for you. Honestly, I think the incremental revenue is not necessarily going to be. It's really hard to track whether an ad would have shown or not, and you have to rely on these ad block recovery companies to tell you how many ads they recovered for you. And to be honest, it seems like a bit of a shakedown situation. The only places, don't forget this either as well, is that you have 60-70% of visits are mobile. The number of visitors who are using ad blockers on mobile is actually really small. The only place where it's a really big problem is in Germany, where all of the newspapers in the country ran ads for quite a long time saying, don't use ad blockers. And guess what? People started using ad blockers a lot more.
I think Ben has the right idea, though. The idea of trying to make your site not intrusive to the user's experience.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that's negative about serving ads to people using ad blockers is that the ad blockers get more and more targeted at what types of ads they block, and eventually they get so sophisticated they actually start breaking sites because they try to get more and more JavaScript or whatever it is kind of in the blocking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't speak for Google on this, just for myself, but when I hear people talking about these things at Google, their concern is that ads are being blocked, ad blockers are happening. So the answer they have is try to get ads to be better. So try to discourage people from making these ads that are more intrusive, so users mind ads less, and revenue still accrues to those who have ads on their sites. That, and also looking for ways to have money get to publishers without having ads. Google's tried a couple of things where people can pay as they go, and AMP also supports AMP Later Pay, for example, where you can pay a little bit of micropayments for every site that you go to. But as you were saying before, people like things that are free.
Yeah.
So they haven't like caught on, but hopefully one of them will catch on because maybe there are more ways to make money aside from ads.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I just don't think users are used to paying for things like, search results.
It's called AMP Later Pay. I've never tried it myself, but Later Pay, I think, allows some sort of micropayment thing to happen. I've seen things before, the other initiatives Google has tried to allow people to opt in to paying by the view. And is it true in the UK still you pay a license for your television? So yeah, it supports the BBC and so on?
Yeah, that
In the Netherlands as
BBC.
well.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Okay.
of
In the US, it's all free TV. So
Yeah, but you have like ads every 10 minutes.
there's a lot of ads
Yeah.
here.
We don't have that.
You can fast forward through those now. Question here in the front.
So one thing that the site I work with struggles with a lot, because we're largely an educational site, is that we want to be able to balance between, being found by, writing articles about things that people are asking about in search, but also talking about things that people don't necessarily even know that they don't know. Do you guys have any advice for balancing that, being found, but also talking about things like, how credit repair works or whatnot that people aren't necessarily explicitly looking for, but, it's knowledge that it's useful to know?
Well, if it's useful to know, then they will have a problem. So lots of people don't know that they're searching for, if you search in terms of solution. So people weren't searching for an SEO plugin, but they are searching for how to get more traffic. So focusing on the problem rather on the solution, if you write text, is a good idea, because people are searching for their problems because they don't know the solution yet, and especially if you're educating, that could be a good approach. I always have to think about the next example about like this medicine that cured bleeding gums. Nobody searched for the medicine, but people are searching for bleeding gums instead of making it better. And then that product got like lots of traction and got sold. So focusing on the problem is a good thing.
Question over here.
It's perhaps more of a comment, but I think you're hearing it from everyone here. And one of the things that's frustrating as a publisher being here at this event for publishers, when we hear especially about AMP pages, is like there's not a single image we see in any of the presentations that show monetization. I haven't seen a single ad. I haven't seen a single sort of subscription plug, anything. And so, I think that what would make us happy as publishers is to see more focus on those components that can help us monetize, because the economics of creating the content is expensive and it's getting harder and harder for us to actually make money. So that's comment one. My second comment was for people talking about circulation in AMP. We're doing an experiment now with a company called Distributed Media Lab, which I think grew out of the original AMP project, and they do recirculation, and they've had pretty good success.
What is the recirculation you're talking about?
Sorry, it's kind of a module that becomes part of your AMP page that allows you to promote other AMP pages yourself or within the context of kind
content
of a
sharing.
network.
Or traffic sharing.
I know money is always a tough thing, and it's just not an area I really specialize in. I've given talks on money before and ads, but my knowledge there isn't as good as other people's who work here. There's a variety of blog posts about this, about techniques about ad monetization and ways to monetize, and there also are a couple of talks you can see that are on YouTube that have been given at AMP conferences before, and AMP roadshows and things like that. Just not my personal area of expertise. I know it can be a problem, though.
I think the silver lining in this is that with the first price auction thing that happened last week, server-to-server bidding, which is it's actually being taken care of by Google as well, EBDR, exchange bidding, that will remove the necessity for having header bidding, which is obviously in the header, so JavaScript. So that disadvantage, that current disadvantage, is going to go away anyway. So it will get better. We just don't know when it's or how much better it's going to get and how quickly.
I know header bidding is now possible on AMP as well. We did a video on that also from the last AMP conference last year.
Did you say it is possible?
There's a version of the thing that's header bidding like. That's
I see.
fundamentally the same. You can do it. I have a video on it, but that was last year, and I've forgotten the details since last April. Sorry.
The other thing about how we sort of solve this with the Ezoic system is how Piper described it earlier, is you match the value or the predicted value of an ad by adjusting the bid floor dynamically on per impression basis. And if you can do that, that effectively gives you a floor for the price, which you would have got through a header bidder if you were going to do header bidding. That's one of the useful things about header bidding, is it does give you a floor where you might not have had one for ad exchange. So it's not all bad news for AMP. Should get better.
Over here.
Yeah, sort of taking it away from AMP and back towards the SEO and site
Thank you.
structure type stuff. So I write for a music news website, and a significant portion of what we cover is nightly reviews of a given band that's on tour. So how would you suggest structuring keywords and organizing that content so that it's not inherently competing with itself because there's a review from last night and the night before and the night before that?
But it's a different band.
It's the same band. So it's a specific kind of corner of the industry where a lot of these bands play a different set every night. So that fan base is looking to see what happened last night. They follow it somewhat like an athletic team. And so what's a way that we can, get those top results the day after when people are looking specifically for that, but then not be competing with our own content down the road when we'd like it to appear when people want information about the band.
You're also in the Google News results then?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a hard question.
Carolyn, do you want to come up here and answer that question? I felt you from behind me. I could feel you. Here.
No, you need a mic.
So you are in Google News, yes?
Yeah.
So do you have a category level page? You're in WordPress?
Yes.
Okay, so do you have a category level page for that band?
I believe so.
Okay. There are tools you can use to add content to the category level page, so it's not just a list of all the articles, right? Mm-hmm. What I would do is make sure that you have your structure correctly and you have breadcrumbs, yes? So every single one of those articles about that band is going to have a breadcrumb that points back up to the category page for that band, right? What we're going to try to do is not necessarily have each one of these news articles rank, but you're going to try to have that category level page rank,
Right.
because that's going to be your trophy term in the universal results, and then it's going to be the news results, and probably need AMP to get in that nice news carousel and make sure you have news schema on the page too, to make sure that you're getting the daily reports in Google News, because that's where you're going to get all that traffic for those pages. But then the incremental value that those pages accumulate is going to point back up to the category level page, which is going to be your trophy term for the band name.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm going to find you after this and we're going to talk about it more.
That was good.
Round of applause.
I think you might have to fight a lot of other people. Another question. Back here.
Hi. So when you were presenting, you were talking about the importance of communicating the important articles to Google via the internal linking structure. My question is about the archive or the category pages. Do you have any advice for best practices for publishers for organizing those pages? Typically, the articles will appear in date order. However, if you're a publisher of evergreen content or content that was done 2 years ago is just as applicable today, like a recipe site or a home improvement site, how would you change that to be able to focus on what you might think is the most important for the users if you're not relying on date order or search traffic or some other index like that?
Well, at Yoast, we have those category pages, and then we have the 3 most important ones or the 5 most important ones. So you have a page in which you give some information and then link to the one. Is that what you mean? You look confused. So and then we have them, and then below that we have them in order, I think, of publishing dates. Yes.
So you have a featured section for each category
Yes.
page, and that you're moving certain content to there.
Yeah.
And then the rest is in date order.
I think so. Yes. So you could do something like that.
Okay, what about using a search on the category page by category where you are only looking at posts that had certain categories? So maybe it was a story about kitchen floors and one category was floors and one category was kitchens. So if you check both boxes, you would basically get only those stories that were about kitchen floors.
That could work as a search function, but I don't know if so that's a good idea UX-wise. But I don't know whether that's a good idea for your SEO strategy. But these 2 things, especially if you have lots and lots of content, could sometimes be, you need to have people find stuff on your website. So checkboxes could be a good UX way to find that article.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. One more question for the panel. Who's our winner?
Okay, a question about, another Yoast question about redirects and canonical URLs. There's a setting in...
Oh, I just asked Carolyn to answer that. No. You can ask me, but it's really technical, and that's not my thing.
Can we get a microphone?
Oh, you want? No.
You
Do you want?
I'm sorry.
Okay, there's a setting in Yoast called canonical URL. So if you have 2 posts that are similar and you want to prioritize one,
Yeah.
you put in
Canonical URL.
canonical URL points
Yes.
to the one that's more important. So is that still a good thing to do, or is it?
Well, canonical actually is made for being exactly the same content. So it's telling Google, I already have this content on another place, and that's where you put in a canonical URL. If it's almost the same, you could do the same thing, but it's not for similar content.
For SEO purposes, yeah, for SEO purposes, you should have one article that is about one thing. If you have 2 articles that are so close that you feel like you need to redirect one to the other or tell Google that one's more important than the other, then you need to get rid of the lesser one or combine them into the same on the URL of the one that's canonical. Because she's right, you're using that's not the intended use.
I was
for
wondering if it's
canonical.
okay if it's a temporary solution. I don't have time to combine all these things.
It's
so.
not even a good temporary solution.
Okay.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of today's panelists, John, Marieke,
Nailed it.
3rd time's a charm, Ben and Anita for joining us today on the panel. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you guys very much.